welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and this is Dr. Stephen Greer, and I'm joined today by Linda Willitts, who is with me and has been working to set up all our special events here for the last 8 months or so, and we are going to be talking about some really exciting events that have happened in the last couple of weeks. We were on a tour out west and had some astonishing events occur in Southern California, in Costa Mesa and Irvine, and also up in Joshua Tree National Park. So we've had some really big news to share, and that's what we'll be covering today in these discussions. Thank you, Linda, for joining us.
Oh, sure.
So I think the first thing I'd like to do is introduce the concept. You know, we do these expeditions 4 or 5 times a year for a week out in various parts of the United States, and the purpose of them are to train people to be ambassadors from Earth to these other civilizations and to learn the protocols of meditation and remote viewing and contact. And we have been doing this for about 19 years now. And this past, a couple weeks ago, we went out to California and had a wonderful gathering in Costa Mesa. Had about 500 people at a presentation we did there, and then had a daytime training, just a workshop for one day in the Orange County area. And that night we took about, 80 or 90 people out to Lake Irvine, there in the hills to the east of Irvine, and did a practice for people, and had some really rather astonishing events take place, especially for a group that large. And so we wanted to share that. One of the things that happened is that we were in a very remote canyon by the lake, and we have these magnetometers that pick up magnetic field flux and other electromagnetic detectors, and they had been pretty quiet. Once our team entered the group, there was already a large group assembled by the time we arrived. They began to get very active, and we started having a lot of electromagnetic signals that began to come into the area, including the magnetometer that picks up the flux field, or the fluxing of the magnetic field around it, going all the way off the scale. And we knew at that point that there was an element of contact that had occurred that was very, very important, particularly with a group that large in that remote an area. And this was followed by, of course, we had to organize 80 or 90 people in sort of 2 semicircles to be out in this remote place. But at about shortly after we were gathering people together and we were having all these detectors going off, we have actually a recording of this. We had a very distinct voice, not human, that was about 3 feet in front of us, just in the air suspended, that said just a few syllables of some kind of language. And everyone stopped and went, "Oh my God, did you hear that?" And a great many people in the circle, even though we were outdoors with a large group, heard it. And in fact, Linda, it was closer to Linda than it was to me. You might want to describe what you heard.
Yes, it was like just this disembodied voice that happened, as Dr. Greer said, about 3 feet up, and it was sort of just to the very slightly to the left of my left foot, and the woman next to me, who's a nurse from the California area, heard it as well, and to me it sounded like, well, it was an unintelligible word, but it was at least 2 to 3 syllables long, and it was extremely audible. It was as loud as I'm talking now, if not a little louder, and it was a very distinct male voice. And my recorder then would have been approximately 3 feet away from it. It's a very high-quality recorder, and it would have picked up the whole sound because all the syllables were equally audible. And what's so really strange about it is it only picked up 1 syllable. And we know for sure, because immediately after we heard it, you can hear us discussing, that it was multiple syllables. And the recorder picked up 1 syllable, which we don't know. You can't really tell what it says. It just sounds like kind of, it's one short syllable. But But what's so bizarre is that if it had been a normal human sound, the recorder would have picked up all the syllables because it was so audible.
Right, and yet everyone, well, not everyone, but most people out there heard it. It was loud enough, and it was definitely a male voice. So we went, well, this is strange, because we had already begun to see some subtle sort of vortices of energies and orbs that people were photographing that had moved in around the group. And one of the things I've talked about for years is that if you're an interstellar civilization and you're traveling faster than the speed of light, your technologies are going to be, what the guys at the CIA that I've met call WSFM, Weird Science and Frickin' Magic, is literally what they call it. And it's very advanced sciences where you can actually have a spacecraft or an extraterrestrial being that's being electronically and transdimensionally projected onto a site. And to the point that you could actually have a being appear and then vanish, or have an orb appear, or have an energy field that would appear, and within it is being held the actual visitors. And this is the kind of thing that would then also set off these electromagnetic detectors, which they've now chosen to use to communicate in different sequences and patterns, which has been occurring since the Orion Transmissions started 2 years ago in Joshua Tree National Park in 2007, and which became over 5 hours of those sort of events in 2008, and now is happening somewhere around 4 or 5 hours a night now, whereas before we could sit out there in the middle of the national park and we would never hear a peep out of any of these devices. So the veil, as I say, is getting thinner, and the time of open and absolute open contact is obviously approaching and becoming more pronounced. But this event, because it was with so many brand new people, it was not as if this was our, central team that's done this for, a decade or two together. Many of these were people who had just only been in an afternoon workshop, and then we hit the field, hit the road running as we do, and went out, and we began to have these manifestations of intelligence around us literally in the first half hour. I mean, it wasn't as if it was many hours into this expedition on that particular night. It was actually a Saturday night, I believe it was the 15th.
Yeah, it was the 14th.
14th, so the
of
November, which is not long ago, a couple weeks ago. And what we found was that around this time there was a brilliant light, like a blue-white light that appeared right above my right foot. I had my legs stretched out, and almost everyone in this whole group saw this. And then shortly after that, there were two more that came zapping in on the opposite side of the circle that were seen. And then subsequent to that, there was one that came in very brilliantly right in front of a woman that has been on a number of our week-long expeditions where we train people to be ambassadors. And we knew that these were actually extraterrestrial beings that were coming in transdimensionally and were interacting with the group and joining in the meditation we do for the healing of the world and universal peace. And these were visible with the naked eye by anyone looking in those areas. In fact, when I asked everyone there if they had seen these brilliant flashes that came right into this darkened area where we were, almost everyone did. So anyone looking in that direction saw these. And then we continued to have the contact and the communication through all these detectors. And this was sort of a warm-up to the kinds of events that were going to happen in the next day and the following week up at Joshua Tree National Park. So, one of the things that we've decided is really critical is to have large numbers of people who understand the sciences of consciousness and all the different so-called cities or manifestations of consciousness and the different powers of awareness that are talked about in the ancient Vedas, because these interstellar civilizations really do understand this and use them as a routine means of contact and communication pretty much as easily as we would talk on cell phones or telephone lines like we are today. And I think this is one of the exciting things about the work we're doing, is that it's giving people the experience of interstellar transdimensional extraterrestrial reality, and so that they understand and actually see these sort of things happening. And of course, we also had a couple of objects that flew right into this canyon where we were, that we saw that between a mountain
right.
and a lake that came in that were lit objects, and multiple people saw these, and then they would vanish. And we actually have a number of these on film. And people said, well, what is this? I said, well, you have to understand that you can have a group of extraterrestrial beings or an entire spacecraft that is resonating beyond the frequency of matter and the speed of light and the speed of electrons, if you will, that are through the crossing point of light. And all you will see as it moves in, or if it's hovering, is something that will look like a spherical orb or a brilliant flash of light or something like that. Now, of course, when it comes all the way through into three-dimensional space-time, you'll see the whole spacecraft, and they can become fully materialized. And in fact, at Joshua Tree a couple of years ago, we had 4 extraterrestrial beings that were fully materialized briefly outside the circle during a meditation. And then when people look back, they had just simply vanished. And I think that this is the sort of thing that for most people sounds like magic, which is, of course, why the folks in the intelligence community call this weird science and frickin' magic, because the kinds of technologies you're dealing with that deal with interdimensional or transdimensional reality and technologies cross into the interface between thought and consciousness and their electronic communication systems. But also what happened with these brilliant objects that were seen in the circle at Lake Irvine with this one-day sort of training group that we did is that I'm fairly certain those were actually extraterrestrial beings, because we did hear this voice that was just suspended in the air and disembodied, as Linda said. What's interesting about it is that, and you're going to hear this in a little while, is that I've often called this a sort of electronic and technological astral projection. It's like if you have a lucid flying dream, or like the Rosicrucians teach, out-of-body travel, that you have your body of light, that's the so-called astral or thought conscious body that has form and light and shape to it, that the extraterrestrial civilizations that are interstellar have the means to teleport or transport that into an area at multiples of the speed of light, or hold it there. And oftentimes the only evidence of it will be an orb or a light that's moving through, or a brilliant flash of light that comes into the area. And that may then be later followed by a being or a vehicle, an actual extraterrestrial vehicle materializing, which we have also seen. So I think that what's being shown to people as they go through this process is a real tutorial, that's sort of a cosmic tutorial in the sciences of consciousness and transdimensional sciences, which is really the next big leap in human science. Once we get out of the dustbin of coal and fossil fuels, we're going to understand that the universe is so much more wonderful than what people are being taught when they get their PhDs from MIT and Caltech. But I digress. Anyway, so Linda, I don't know if you have other things you want to share about Lake Irvine. It's a very exciting one-night expedition.
Well, one thing that I would like to mention is the man that was sitting just 2 people away from me on my left, where the voice appeared slightly to my left, was a Caltech physicist, as a matter of fact, and he also had a magnetometer and was just blown away by the periodic great bursts of activity on his magnetometer, when most of the time it was just quiet. And he said after we heard the voice that right before the voice spoke, that he had asked the ETs who were communicating through the radar detectors and magnetometers if they could say something, because he didn't understand just the beeping sounds. And it was shortly after that this voice spoke.
Right, and it was very near where he was.
Right,
right in front of him.
Right to my left, and it was the voice was slightly to my left.
Correct. So, I mean, it was almost as if this ET was responding to this was a thought request he made.
Right.
And so this was quite impressive to this Caltech PhD scientist who was there with all of his gear. And, of course, you know, he had this kind of gear out before. And, of course, we were out in a wilderness area. There is nothing that would make these magnetic field meters go completely off scale. And they were just, as soon as we formed the group and started doing our contact protocols, and we were using the consciousness techniques of going into deep meditation and remote viewing space and where these ET civilizations are and inviting them to that site for universal peace. We had the CSETI tones that have been recorded in crop circles and in other locations that are beeping tones, and we transmit those out into space with radio transceivers. And then we also have bright lasers that we're sending up as a vector. So all that's going on, and all of a sudden all this activity begins that's electromagnetic. And yet this one man, I'm so glad you remembered that who is a scientist, had one of these magnetic field meters that he had brought out to the site. And he was amazed at the activity, but he couldn't really understand what they were trying to say through it. And so he asked it, which he could understand, and suddenly this voice says a few syllables really right in front of him. And that's the kind of interactivity that happens with these extraterrestrial civilizations, is that once you're in a state of coherence and consciousness and in a very innocent way just ask, some manifestation like this will occur that is indisputable, because it wasn't like he just heard it in his head or something. Most of the people there, unless they had their ears covered up and were too far away from the site, heard it, because it wasn't a very soft sound. It was very distinct.
Right.
And also with these brilliant lights that occurred inside the center of the circle. I mean, not way above us in the sky, but at ground level.
By the ground.
Yeah, I mean, maybe 3 feet above us, or at our level of our chest, basically.
Right.
We had these brilliant things, and I know that these are actual ET beings that are being, if you will, electronically astrally projected into the area that are then communicating with the group. And this is sort of the thing that happens, is happening more and more routinely on these expeditions that we're doing. So there was a very exciting series of events and sightings that happened for just one evening for a one-day workshop.
It was. And it was amazing for a one-day workshop. A lot of people were really amazed at the level of activity we had out there.
Yeah, it was a wonderful group, actually, for such a large group as well.
They were great.
And very coherent and very, organized, and kind of everybody on the page and with the picture on that. So then what happened is that the very next day we went up to Joshua Tree National Park, and on that Sunday, which would, I guess, now be the 15th of November, and we went out to this remote site that's way about 30 miles or so into the national park that we go to. That is where we had a big kind of Hershey-shaped ET craft come straight out of the sky and go into the ground in 1996. And Linda, you may want to review that for people so they...
Well, it was my very first CSETI training in 1996, and it was the most incredible thing, because we were driving out, and actually Dr. Greer had said earlier that evening that something would happen that would be fast and spectacular and late. And it was between 1 and 1:30 a.m., and we were driving out from this dry lake bed towards the Geology Tour Road site that we now have visited every year since. And I was right behind Dr. Greer's car, and I was driving, so I could see right through the windshield from directly above, like the zenith of the sky, this object that was the size of my fist at arm's length came down. It took a second or two to come down, and it was like brilliant, like fire flames that were the color of mostly teal, bright teal with a little white towards the top, and it was shaped like a Hershey's Kiss with like the white little paper off the top. And it came down, and when it approached the desert floor, I expected to hear a sound, and it was utterly silent, but it illuminated the whole desert for as far as you could see and merged into the ground.
And where it merged into the ground, I was told this is where they have an underground base, a transdimensional interstellar underground base. And I quickly tried to get near as we could on the road to that area. And that's the site we use every year, and that's where we went on Sunday night, and we were there for the week, going out every night to that site. So that's why we go to that particular site, and that's also where we've had a number of other amazing things over the years take place, including the event where we have on this a new book that's just come out called Contact, Countdown to Transformation. And when you go to disclosureproject.org, you can get that book, and it comes with a free DVD that has images of this. It's where we had this beautiful golden sort of red-orange craft that was right over that area that we filmed for 20 or 30 minutes back a few years ago, and we have continued to have amazing contact at this particular site. And these events that have happened at this Joshua Tree site since 1996 are summarized in this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation. And the DVD has not only the CSETI beeping tones and sounds that you can play as a means of vectoring in these craft, but it also has a lot of these images that we've been getting over the years, all the way back to 1992 in Florida when we had 4 ET craft that came in when we were making contact there and that were signaling to us. So all of this is on this DVD that comes with the book. And it's a very good thing for people to see, so it gives you a sense of the range of events that have been happening over the last 17 or 18 years. And one of the things that's beautiful about this particular site is that years ago we had an event where we were sitting there on a moonless night, very clear, and this was before we had the Orion transmissions that came out of the Orion sector of space last year and the year before that set off these electromagnetic detectors. We suddenly were sitting there, and we all noticed it was like we were sitting in a full moon light or something brighter than a full moon. And we looked around to the point that you could almost like see faint shadows and things like this.
Right.
And I mentioned it, and I looked up, and I could see that the source of it was out of Orion. I clearly remember that.
Right.
And as we acknowledged it, it then went off in a snap, and it was like we were in pitch dark again.
It's like somebody had flipped a switch. It was that
like
dramatic.
Flipped the switch, and it's right over that site. So we keep having these kinds of really amazing, somewhat mysterious things happen there. And we also, at this same site, had during a meditation, we were in this deep meditation where we were we do the mantra meditation, and we have a CD that you can also get at disclosureproject.org that has the instruction for this meditation, where we take people through the mantra meditation, but also another CD that teaches what we call coherent thought sequencing, which is when you, from a deep level of meditative state, remote view deep space and then show the ETs through sequencing images from space mentally where we're located, almost like a vector, but in a mental imagery. And we were doing that and then doing this beautiful prayer for the healing of Gaia, Mother Earth, and universal peace. Suddenly, this craft appeared from this landing site where we saw this huge craft go in 1996. And it appeared, and as it came over, it was fully materialized. I could have, if I'd stood on my chair or jumped up, I could have probably touched the underside of it. It came over making this weird sound. It would sound like wah, 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 like that. And it came over right over a Joshua tree that's since somehow been cut down that was at this parking area that we use. Came right over the top of that tree, went to our west and then dematerialized in thin air.
Right.
And this is also the site where we had a brilliant object that came in about 10 feet over the group that burst, this massive burst of light that was so bright that people, and on another year, about 2 years ago, where peoples with their eyes closed could see the light, the veins of their eyelids. It was so bright, and
right.
Everyone was suffused in this celestial energy and light where their energy was just resonated upward into a higher state of consciousness. It was extraterrestrial, but it was also very celestial, but visible with the naked eye. And towards the end of that meditation, I kind of went back into the meditation for the whole group, and towards the end of it, this beautiful blue-white ship appeared over the landing site that was rather large. And it appeared and was there for several seconds, and then as it vanished at the end of the meditation, it sort of dissolved like a PowerPoint. The presentation would dissolve. It sort of vanished and dematerialized and folded within space-time.
It was gorgeous.
Oh, so beautiful. Right over, maybe 5 or 10 feet above the floor
right.
of the desert. So this is the site that we're on, just to give you some sort of quick background in a few minutes of what happened this year. So I don't know if you want to start sharing some of that, Linda, just to give people an idea.
Oh, well, so many things happened. It's hard to remember them all. We had so much activity out there this year. We had a resumption of the Orion Transmissions, and ever since 2008, when we had the probably 5 total hours of Orion Transmissions in Joshua Tree, and 2007 was when we had the first Orion Transmissions for only 23 minutes, and then 2008 in Joshua Tree was the next time we heard the radar detectors go off, and they went off about a total of 5 hours. And once again, you could tell they were transmitting the information that Dr. Greer was able to translate. And since then, we have had at numerous trainings, the detectors go off and they interact with us. They go off constantly, but you don't necessarily have the sense that they're doing Orion transmissions. They're just doing interactions. And we had definite transmissions again occurring in Joshua Tree, as well as interactivity from the radar detectors and magnetometers that we had. And we had numerous nights, dramatic temperature fluctuations where we would come on site, and it was really cold this year. We'd have temperatures in the 30s when we came on site, and there could be very localized temperature increases. At one point, some people were measuring temperatures well into the 50s, and right where we were having some ET activity, the people there happened to have a temperature recorder that was measuring into the 60s.
Right. Actually, what would happen is that we would have a series of craft we would see in the sky, and the detectors would begin to be very active, and then there would be sort of a thickening of the air around the group. People could actually palpably feel and see, and it's when there is a energy field being put around the group that is from an extraterrestrial vehicle that is in the process of being partially materialized. And not only are the detectors going bananas, but this temperature change happens where it went from being in the upper 30s to about 69 degrees within a few minutes. Now, this was not just some heat inversion. There was nowhere out in the desert when we were driving out there that was anywhere near that temperature. And so you have this sort of phenomenon happening that's amazing. And
this happens all the
that
time.
Night on Sunday before we went out, a person who's on our team, Emery, and I went out to the back of where we were staying at the edge of the national park at the house where we were hosting everyone for dinner on that first night, and there was a brilliant object that came in from transdimensionally and flashed right within about 3 feet of us, just as it had in Costa Mesa. And I was told, we're with you. And so as we actually went out and entered the park, we had the detector, the electromagnetic detectors in the vehicle as we were going in, a signal that was the case, and we actually saw an object coming in. So as we got on the site, this all began to happen, and it was it was from the very, very, very first night, within hours of the team gathering there. And again, many of the people there, I guess we had about 46 people this year.
Right.
A lot of them had never been on one of these sort of expeditions, but it was an astonishing series of events that happened beginning within literally hours of our arriving, even at the house that we were renting that's on near the west entrance, Joshua Tree National Park.
One thing that was really pretty dramatic about this whole week period was we had more ET voices than, we've had ET voices over the years occasionally, but we had it happen a few times this week, which was rather striking. This one particular night, it happened to be Tuesday night, we walked down the path to the east, as we often do, and I was just reviewing my recording about that to refresh my memory on everything that happened. And while we were down quite a ways down the path, maybe a quarter of a mile or so, there were a couple members of our team that had gone on ahead, but we didn't know it. And we were looking further towards the east, Dr. Greer and myself and several other people, and saw what looked to be a laser light pointing up from the ground and kind of slightly, slanted towards the northeast.
Right. It was more white, however, than the green ones we have, and it was definitely. And we asked everyone, did anyone have a laser? And no one did.
Right. They didn't have one.
We knew that it was some kind of an energy beam coming from the ETs that were there, doing some kind of signaling to some of their colleagues out in deep space, because it was pointed upward into space from the Earth. It wasn't coming down from space to the Earth. It was coming from the ground upward, but it was only, maybe 15 to 20 feet in front of us.
Right, and the people that were down there, not only did they not have lasers, but they were out of sight of us as well at that point.
And so, yes, and now this begins a sequence of things that is, I think, the most important event in the last, I don't know how many decades of this issue. And I say that advisedly, having been involved in much of this as the head of CSETI and the Disclosure Project.org. But this particular sequence of events that happened was astonishing, because after that happened, and I could see out in the field, out in the desert where we were, and it was, I guess, around 10:45, 11 o'clock that night. We had taken a break because we'd already been out there since about 8. And we were walking out there when there was a group of people, several of us there, and we saw this whitish beam of laser-like light that came straight up from the ground going into space. And then I began to see various orbs and energy fields, almost like a heat in the desert effect, and swirling vortices and what have you. And I knew there were a number of ET beings that were transdimensionally out in that area, right, and that were observing the group. And this at the same time that we had some pretty spectacular overflights of objects in the sky above us that we had filmed with our night scope. So as I was doing that, we were making contact in consciousness, and I was inviting them to come with me back to where the circle was, which was near the parking area of this particular their site that we use. And as I turned to do that, there was this enormous, brilliant, like a fountain of green light that emerged from the desert and then became a pink and maroon and gold. And it was so bright it lit up the whole northern part of Joshua Tree National Park.
A huge expanse.
I mean, we have the tail end of this on film. It was right, astonishing, and it appeared to be very close to us and very much near us in the park.
Right.
And this, I think everybody saw, because it was just an amazing color and amazing.
Even the people that had their backs to it saw the illumination from it. It was
the illumination from it
and big.
So as we were seeing that, right after that, and after I had invited these ETs that were stationed to the east of our circle out in this field, this landing field, that's this big, huge plane that we've seen these craft come in and out of, and where we had just seen the laser light, the laser had been pointing right in the direction of where this enormous, brilliant object illuminated the desert.
Right.
And I don't think that's a coincidence. And then I saw this object that looked like the size of maybe a little bigger than a silver dollar, a little bigger than that. That was a soft white object that was floating beside us it would be to our right as we were walking back to the circle, which was
right.
to the north of us. And I said, oh, my God, this thing is right here. And so, and then it appeared and floated, moving with us, and then dematerialized. And so we came back up to rejoin everyone who was still up by our chairs in the circle. And we were there. Of course, everybody was very excited about this large craft, this sighting that we had seen. And as we were all gathered sort of on the north and east side of where our circle was in a group, we suddenly heard, for several seconds, a group that sounded like 3 or 4 ET voices talking in the direction of the path where I had seen this orb.
Right.
And a lot of the people there heard this, and there were we have almost a 4th-generation night scope that I just gotten that's wonderful, and I could see there was no people, there were no humans or anyone on our group in this area where we had heard this. So this is another thing that was sort of a voice event. And I went, oh, my God, they're right here with us. They have joined us. And many, many, many people heard this. So I said, we really need to sit in meditation again and see how much further contact can happen. So people were sort of getting themselves organized. And at this point, Linda and Raven sit down on the chairs that are on the west side of the circle facing east, where the voices were, where the landing was, and where I'd seen this orb. And Linda, you may want to just tell the background of what you and our team member Raven were doing.
Yeah, not everyone had taken their seats yet, but we sat down, and it was pitch dark. There wasn't a moon this week. We chose this week because it was so dark. And Raven started taking pictures in the darkness with her camera. I could hear the clicking. And she was sitting next to me, so she was taking pictures. Our backs were to the west, so she was taking pictures towards the east, slightly southeast. And it was pitch dark, as I said, and she was not using a flash, and there were no lights visible at all. Period.
Right.
Zilch. I mean, it was dark. And then it was a couple of days later that she downloaded her pictures and discovered what I'll let Dr. Greer describe it. It was amazing.
Well, I have to say, one of the things that's sort of the backstory of this is that Raven has asked the ETs to sort of connect with her awareness and her camera so that when she would take pictures, they would be there. And they were. And it started actually at the Outer Banks a few months ago when we were there in May of 2009. And she just felt to take the picture. She took a picture, and it's on our website. If you go to CSETI.org, CSETI.org, and you can see this, and it's a disc at about a 45-degree angle out over the ocean, just right off from where our beach house was. And we're going to do one of these expeditions to the Outer Banks of North Carolina out in the ocean again this spring. And we're also, by the way, going to be doing this for a week at Boca Grande Island off the coast of Florida near Fort Myers. But it's an island that juts out into the Gulf of Mexico. That's beautiful. And we're going to do this in February. I think Linda has
February 7th through 12th.
Yeah, the 7th through the 12th of February. And you can see this at CSETI.org. And that's open to you folks who want to come and spend a week out there. It's a nice time of year to get into some warmer weather. But also
only 40 people, so...
Yeah, it's only limited to 40 people because we're meeting in an oceanfront house that can only hold that many. So, but if you want to join us, we're going to make contact there and train people to do the meditation and remote viewing, and God only knows what will happen given what's been happening recently. So anyway, getting back to this story, we were, of course, it took a while for her to go through all her pictures. A day or two later, she says, oh, my God. She looks at this thing, and you cannot believe it. In a picture, now this is pitch black, and the people aren't in their chairs, there's an orb. And this picture is going to be released. We've got to get we're doing all the measurements of the site and everything. This picture, in my opinion, is the most important picture in the history of the ET and UFO subject, bar none. More anything, I've never seen anything this important. And what it is there is a orb exactly like the one I saw that came up with me from the landing area. And there's sort of a cone of light dispersing from it that illuminates these empty chairs. And you can see a bush on the left and then like 3 or 4 empty chairs. And above where the third chair would be is this extraterrestrial being that's there crystal clear. And when she looked at it and she zoomed in on it and took out some of the kind of noise, because she only has a 6-megapixel camera, and adjusted the contrast so she could see what this being looks like, it is an absolute extraterrestrial being that is hovering in this cone of light about just right above the level of the chairs, which were about 39 inches high, outside the circle, and it's looking straight at her and the camera. And she had taken the picture with an ISO of 400. It's a digital camera, and had the shutter open for 3 or 4 seconds. So nothing is blurred, and she didn't have it on tripod. So this had to blip in very quickly in order for it to appear on this camera. And when you look at this person, what it is that he's facing, his chest is turned and his head facing where she is, but his legs, you could tell he was moving towards the light or emerging, and his head is very large. You can see all the features. He has flesh-colored skin, completely looks like he could be a human, a Caucasian human, very flesh-colored skin. He has sort of goggles on that are like a night vision system, but more look like glasses, but I know that's what they are. They're transdimensional imaging system. He has, you can see his left leg, right leg, his chest, his head. He has a very large cranium, and he has a sort of a concave area, sort of an indented area in his forehead with 2 ridges. So he's definitely not a human. And from his eyes to the top of his head would be the size of most humans' heads. So he has a very large cranium. When I saw that, I went, "Oh my God, this man must have an IQ of 400 or 500." And then you could see actually his the nose, his lips, the chin, and you can see both shoulders. His left hand sort of in the air, and his right one at his waist. And one leg is extended, and the right one is sort of in midair bent because he was actually kind of in motion. And this is levitating above the group, outside the circle, but very close to the circle. Now, this photograph of an extraterrestrial transdimensionally being held there by one of these probes, one of these light probes, is, in my opinion, the most astonishing photograph I've ever seen. I mean, we were literally, when we saw this the first night, I was up to 4:30 in the morning looking at it going, good God, this is astonishing. So this is what we did. We went back to the site and measured, the whole area. And I have to say that where this being appeared is the only unambiguous area he could have appeared in. And what I mean by that is that there's a sign on the left, there's a bush, and then further around to the right from where he was is a Joshua tree. But where he's floating is clear desert air. There's no mistake about what this is, and we actually did all those measurements. And the light is very directional because you can see the creases in the blankets that people had on their chairs. Well, it was cold. It was down in the low 30s at times out there with wind, and it was chilly. And so, but you can see the chairs, and you can see everything crisp and crystal clear, which meant that this had to be very quick for it to be that crisp and clear. And this ET is literally floating there and has his head turned, looking exactly right into the camera. I have to tell you people that this is exactly what I've been describing for years. Now, with the naked eye, no one saw anything. And this is what's really important, is that with the naked eye, this was transdimensional. The digital camera got this, but it picked it up probably in a very short instant. And she had connected with them, asking that they allow themselves to be imaged and photographed. And, while there are lots of pictures of UFOs and ET craft, to have a picture of a being that's floating over a CE-5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, diplomatic contact group is historic, to say the least, and astonishing. And this is going to go, I'm going to send a copy of this straight to the White House. But this is one of these things that when the implications of this are enormous, because what it means is that the time for more and more open contact is rapidly approaching, because this is a whole group of people. And, of course, everyone saw this enormous light. Many people had seen the orbs. Everyone had seen a number of craft that had flown over. We had, on that first night we were out, by the way, we had it looked like a mothership that flew into the park.
Right.
That was it was enormous, at arm's length, a couple inches, and it moved in from the north and below the level of the mountains, and it literally materialized and then elongated and then dematerialized and then reappeared as two craft. And this,
to me, it was reminiscent of the Phoenix Lights.
Yes, it did look like the Phoenix Lights.
It was amber-colored, and it was several lights kind of in a row like that. But
yes, it was much closer. And we knew, and this was the very first night we were out, by the way, the very first night. And so we knew that there was going to be a major and ongoing contact this week. But for this photograph, when I looked at the photograph that happened this night of the event we're describing, I thought, well, this number of people had gotten that some of these craft that we were seeing were from the galaxy Andromeda. Now, for people who don't understand the astrophysics and astronomy very well, the Milky Way galaxy is the galaxy that our sun and our planet, Earth, is in. And that has about 100 billion stars in it. And that's called the Milky Way galaxy. And it's a spiral galaxy, and you've all seen pictures of it. Andromeda galaxy is 2.5 million light years away, and it's sort of a twin galaxy to our galaxy. It's a very similar size and shape as a spiral galaxy, and you can see it this time of year if you look up in the sky with good binoculars or a good night scope. And we had started having this sort of sense that we were having some of these civilizations were from way outside of our many people say it's a galactic event happening. I said, no, it's not. It's intergalactic. It's cosmic. It's universal. And I've said this since 1990. Well, we've been getting the sense that this was from Andromeda. So we had at Rio Rico in Arizona, when we had this gathering with over 200 people out in the desert south of Tucson last month or in October, we had an object that I had remote viewed that was going to be a sort of a complex tetrahedral-shaped object that would appear right over us. Raven took a picture up in that part of the sky, again, just feeling it, and this object is there. Well, we had this similar object come into Joshua Tree the very first night, and I got the sense that what we were seeing was also one of these craft, not all of them, was from the Andromeda system. This galaxy is 2.5 million light years away. So we got the sense that perhaps this person, this being, that was there was from Andromeda. Now, we can't prove this, except one of the things that maybe is an indication is that after we looked at this picture and began to analyze it, and looked at this particular being, who I'm estimating to be 4 to 5 feet tall. It's very hard to tell because he's outside the group a little bit, but we know the height of the chairs. We have all the measurements, and he wasn't way far out because he would have been out of the area of light. But I'm estimating him to be about that height, and it's definitely a male. And he... interestingly, the following night, once we discovered this, Raven was sitting next to someone with a very good magnetometer and was asking, and mentally, this being that she photographed, are you from Andromeda? and suddenly she and this other guy felt someone touch their hands, and the area around them went from 30-some degrees to 69 degrees temperature, warmth, like there was an energy field, and his magnetometer started pinging right off the scale, bouncing off the wall of the meter. And when she asked it again, the magnetometer did the same thing, as to answer yes. And now I know this sounds really kind of way out there for folks, but hey, if it wasn't way out there, it wouldn't be interstellar. It would be man-made. And this is exactly what's happening. It's really, really exciting.
We have been able to use the radar detectors and the magnetometers to communicate because they are that interactive with us. So this wasn't the first question we've ever asked them or anything, and they answer affirmatively quite often.
Yes, they do. And in fact, we have found that they actually take specific detectors to use for specific communication purposes, where they'll go into the electronics. And I've talked about this being, it isn't like they're shooting a beam from outer space to the detector. They're in transdimensional space, folded within the space-time of where we're located, and they're actually in the circuitry of the specific detector. The reason we know this is that we will have one detector, say we'll have two identical detectors, and some of these are just like radar detectors, and one will be, and they're absolutely identical, like Todd Goldenbaum has one and Linda Willitts has one that are identical. One will be going off on one band, and the other one will be silent, and they're within inches of each other. Now, if it wasn't coming from within the space of the detector itself, and if it was just a beam being shot linearly across the air, they would both be going off, just like if you're riding down a highway. Everyone's the radar detectors who have one goes off when the cop hits them with it.
Right.
So it's very specific. And there's another detector that we have nicknamed Walter, because someone named Walter gave it to us, that's very, very interactive and will accentuate things when we make a point that's correct. It'll beep, beep, beep twice every time.
And the Walter radar detector routinely turns itself on when it's off. I mean, it starts beeping when it's off.
Yes, and we had many people have their electronics turned on even though they'd be turned off. Some mysterious electromagnetic force would switch them on. This happened every night, all week. I mean, the most unusual and strange things. And so these are the sort of things that are happening. I mean, it would actually take us a week to recount the things that happened that week because there were so many things that happened. But
one thing that I want to mention, the same night of the big burst, and I was just reviewing this on my recorder. So we saw the big burst. We walked back to the circle. On our way back, you mentioned seeing the silver dollar-sized white light that was basically positioned exactly where the beam that Raven captured in her photo is shooting the beam of light. I mean, it's like you can see it looks like a star, but it's near ground level. I mean, it's several feet above the ground, but it certainly isn't in the sky by any means. And it's what's shooting the beam of light that illuminates the chairs and the ET. So, but anyway, so you saw that, and mentioned it at the time on my tape. And then we heard the ET voices as we were standing around kind of debriefing about and asking people who had seen this brilliant burst of light from different directions. And then we started noticing we got bubbles in our compasses. And these, for one thing, we've never had bubbles in our compasses at Joshua Tree before. They first started happening in 2006 in Crestone, and then they have happened various other places, and these are new compasses without leaks in them that bubbles appear in response to an electromagnetic pulse of energy. And it was after that giant burst that a whole bunch of people, including myself and you, I believe, had bubbles in their compasses too.
That's right. And the other thing to remember is that where this what I call a sort of transdimensional electronic astral projection system is located, where this ET is sort of hovering above the chairs, is exactly where we heard the ET voices talking.
That's
exactly
right.
In that area. And what's interesting about that is that we'd heard the voice right in front of us at this event at Lake Irvine. Now, the other thing that continued to happen is sort of a motif here, and that is one morning I was in a meditation, in that relaxed sort of hypnagogic state and very relaxed. And suddenly, very clearly, I heard a male voice say, "The Joshua trees transmit star energy." It was the strangest thing I ever heard. And I started thinking, oh, my God, the Joshua trees transmit star energy. What does this mean? Well, they sort of are like antennae. We've always felt the Joshua trees themselves are sort of transdimensional antennas, and there's some kind of energy field that they absorb and transmit back out around the earth, and they even look like antennae sitting in the desert. They're amazing, amazing beings, these Joshua trees. And while that was happening, Linda, you tell them, you were right underneath where my room was on the
right. In
level.
fact, we were in the outdoor kitchen, and the pool area has a kitchen, but it was pretty much right under where Dr. Greer's room was, where he was sleeping. And it was Jan, Raven, and I standing by the counter in this outdoor kitchen, and we were whispering to each other because Dr. Greer was still asleep and upstairs, and Todd was still asleep in the room off the pool room. So we were whispering, and sort of in a little gap when we were all quiet, we all distinctly heard a male voice whisper. And again, it was several syllables that we couldn't understand, but it was very clear. I'm like, did you guys do that? I had kind of had my back turned at that point, and they said, no, did you do that? And I'm like, no. And then we all agreed, well, it also sounded male. And it whispered because we were whispering.
Right. So, this whole week was full of these sort of unusual things. And I have to say, it's the fact that during an intentional contact event where we are training people to be ambassadors from Earth to these other civilizations for the purpose of open contact and universal peace and starting a whole new chapter in human history where we become a global and then interstellar civilizations ourselves, living peacefully on Earth with new energy systems, new sciences, the science of consciousness fully developed and acknowledged. We are having this exponential increase in contact to the point that during the sequence of amazing events that happened that night in Joshua Tree, a member of our team who has asked the ETs to allow her to be able to photograph gets this image of an actual ET being floating just outside and above the circle looking straight at us and straight at her, that is in this cone of light that is exactly what I had been seeing sort of with subtle vision and remote viewing, but which many people had seen with their naked eyes, and that is these brilliant flashes or orbs that would come near our circle or around our circle. And I have said for years those are actual extraterrestrial biological beings being brought in with a transdimensional sort of projector system, if you will, or teleportation system. And that's precisely what this picture shows. And it's really an astonishing thing. So we're going to soon put that out. If you want to, get on our list for this, and when all this is coming out, though, you can go to CSETI.org or disclosureproject.org. And also at CSETI, CSETI.org, you can find out about what we're going to be doing in Florida. Our next expedition out under the stars is going to be out in the Gulf of Mexico in February, the 7th to the 12th, and we're going to be at Boca Grande Island for that week, and you're invited to come if you are free and would like to. And we are going to do a wonderful retreat, get out of the cold, and go out and see what happens while we're at this. We've never gone to this particular part of the United States to make contact and do this, but it should be a wonderful training expedition, and we'll be teaching people the meditation techniques, the remote viewing techniques, the contact protocols, and we'll gather each night on the beach in front of this house that we'll be renting, and we'll see what happens. So I'd like to thank Linda for joining me. We're about out of time now. And I'd like to thank the wonderful people at the World Puja Network for giving us this time to share with you our experiences out under the stars and our work to create universal peace and to heal the earth. and thank all of you for your help and support. This is Dr. Stephen Greer, and you've been listening to Conversations with Dr. Greer. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.